A little more shortly on that story you heard in your 10 o'clock bulletin. West Yorkshire Police investigating Frank Hester, the businessman who is known to have given £10 million to Rishi Sunak's Tory party, believed to have given £15 million to Kemi Badenoch's Tory party, and of course stands accused of the most vile, misogynistic and racist abuse of Diane Abbott. West Yorkshire Police revealing that they are investigating that incident. It's not with a heavy heart, because that's a silly phrase to use in this context. It's Friday, right? So there are days, there are weeks where we reach Friday and I find myself looking for stories that we can have a bit of fun with. And some weeks there just aren't any. But we may have one a little later in the programme. You know, these stories about, these meaningless stories about flags. You wait weeks, you wait months for one rabble-rousing, tabloid-punted story about a flag to pop up. And then, like bloody buses, they start queuing up for our attention. And I didn't even talk to you about the fish and chip. Did you know there's a story about a fish and chip shop in Greenwich, I think, having a flag painted outside, a mural painted outside? I've been covering these stories. I've been ignoring these stories now for about 20 years, because whenever a story like that appears in a newspaper like The Sun, the fact of the matter will always be that the rules have been broken regarding any flag or mural. So it's got nothing to do with the fact that it was a Union flag or a St. George's flag or a Independent Republic of Ruritania flag. The point will be that no one is allowed to put flags up in that council block or paint any sort of mural on that wall, particularly in Greenwich, because it's smack in the middle of a World Heritage site. But you put it through the mangle of dishonest and deliberately provocative right-wing journalism, and suddenly it's offered up as an affront to our very patriotic sensibilities. And that story got fact-checked by Reuters yesterday. I've really held out much hope that the media outlets who went to town on that story will be giving the same level of prominence to the actual facts. And today we have found out that there's some new embroidery on an England kit. You have to change the kits all the time because that's one of the ways in which he makes your money. Even Kidderminster Harriers changes its home and away kits every season because it brings in a few quid that we can hopefully spend on players. £125, 125 spondulics for a new shirt. And in order to make it distinguishable from the old shirt, one of the things they've done is embroider a cross on the back that is no longer red and white, but is instead a few other colours. I know what you're thinking. Christ, James, how can you be planning to talk about Israel when there's a flag on the back of the England shirt that has looks slightly different in colour to some other flags that we've always looked at? I know. The good news is we probably will be talking about that a little later in the programme because of the need for not speed, but levity. So we turn our attention first this morning instead to the coalescing situation in Israel and Gaza, where Blinken, the Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, the American Secretary of State, is essentially saying that there is a need for an immediate and sustained ceasefire. Now, with these stories as they develop, and with the intricacies sometimes of international diplomacy, we can walk through it together. All right, don't bite my head if I've got things wrong. But it looks to me like there has been a fairly significant sea change in feeling. The first indication of it was, of course, Chuck Schumer, the most senior Jewish politician in America, warning that Israel was in danger of becoming a pariah state. And now Anthony Blinken is in Israel ahead of a United Nations vote on a U.S. draft resolution which supports calls for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. Tied, of course, to the release of the hostages still held by Hamas. America, it is objectively fair to say, the United States of America, it is objectively fair to say, becoming more and more critical of and concerned about Benjamin Netanyahu's conduct and tactics in this conflict. And I want to approach this, if we can, from a thoughtful perspective. And I want to look, as we do, at the nature of change and transformation. No one could put a number on when too much would be too much. Nobody could Nobody could identify, from any corner of the conversation, nobody could identify when the response of Israel to that 7th of October terror attack that left 1,200 people dead and 250 taken hostage. Nobody could put a figure or even a description upon the notion of what level of response would be too much. How much would be too much? I couldn't. I was in absolutely no doubt whatsoever about the necessity and the justification of a huge response from Israel. And yet, even as that response began, we found ourselves unable to pinpoint precisely how much would be too much. These, I think, are the three stages of the story. And until the third, I suspect that most of us were in agreement with each other. Number one, this was an act of unimaginable horror on October the 7th, directed at the people of Israel, every single one of them, and therefore the government of Israel must respond. Number two, I don't know that the response is distinguishing carefully enough between Hamas terrorists and Palestinian civilians. And if it doesn't distinguish enough between Hamas terrorists and Palestinian civilians, then the horror is replicated in many ways for many observers on the outside. So that then for me became a fear that what was driving Netanyahu and his most vocal supporters was a belief that they were entitled to destroy the whole of Gaza, that there was no limit upon civilian suffering high enough to stop Israeli aggression. And that's a terrifying thought for a number of reasons. But from our perspective, it's chiefly a terrifying thought because you can't prove it. And whenever you express fears that that might be what is happening, you leave yourself open to accusations of antisemitism or Jew hatred from, in some cases, some quite sensible or ordinarily sensible people. Even when you find evidence, not only that Benjamin Netanyahu has expressed thoughts akin to that position in the past, but his cabinet is positively loaded with people who still say it now. Israel seems to be embarked upon the deliberate destruction of the Gaza Strip, and you are labelled Jew hater. So I think some people, and I've got a horrible feeling I'm one of them, I've got a horrible feeling that if that particular accusation wasn't so vituperative, so vicious, however confident you are that it's not true, I wonder whether we've talked about this a little less. Maybe not. Maybe I'm being a bit unfair on myself. We talked about it a fair old amount. But it is obviously an accusation designed to shut down debate and to shut down conversation. In fact, one of the Israeli government spokespeople in this country, someone you've heard from a lot, although not on this program, a chap called Elon Levy, has now been suspended from duty, something which, again, may not receive quite the coverage that you might expect in a fair and equal universe. But he's been rowing online with our Foreign Secretary, with the UK Foreign Secretary, Lord Cameron, over whether or not Israel is hindering the passage of aid into Gaza. Spoiler alert, it is. And yet this chap was absolutely and rather rudely and furiously denying that it was, leading to his suspension from his role as an English language government spokesman. So what do you do? Here's a really good example for you. Okay, well, what do you do with that? So you mentioned some numbers, and someone will remind you that you can't rely on these numbers because Hamas controls the health authority in the Gaza Strip. So the very deliberate attempt to undermine any sort of objective context for a conversation about what's going on. And of course, you can't counter it by saying, well, actually, I've got my number off Reuters or I got my numbers off Channel 4 News, because they're not allowed in. So you try to denigrate the statistical claims coming out of this area to the point where you can't believe anything that you're being told, but you won't let in the actual journalists who would be able to do an objective job of doing it. You'll let in some people who have have pledged their undying and unquestioning allegiance to Benjamin Netanyahu's government, who call themselves journalists in the same way that I could call myself a footballer. But you don't let in people like John Simpson and people like Katya Adler and people like Christiane Amanpour and people like Matt Fry. You don't let them in. And so how then do you deal with the fact that the Israeli Prime Minister's, or Israel's English language government spokesman has been suspended? Does that mean we can't trust anything that they say? I would never dream of making that claim. I'm just showing you what double standards sound like, what double standards look like. So there's also a comment that a few of you are reminding me of that isn't particularly relevant to today's conversation, but certainly helps with context, which is that Donald Trump's son-in-law has talked about the development potential of the port that is currently being built on the Gazan coast to try to get aid into the area because the Israeli government or forces beyond their control are preventing it from getting there via ordinary means. The denial of which seems to be the reason for the suspension of Eylon Levy from his role as the Israeli English language government spokesman. I suppose you'd have to presume they think he has been mistaken or less than honest for that suspension to have been undertaken. So at 14 minutes after 10, we find ourselves wondering what's changed. What's changed? Nothing's changed. All we've seen is a continuance of what was going on last time America decided not to call for the ceasefire that the UN resolution wanted. There'll be semantic differences. There may be some meaningful and profound differences. But it is a US draft resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, tied to the release of hostages. And it is the first time that America has supported calls for an immediate ceasefire in the region. And as far as I can see, nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. So, what has changed? For you, as much as your view on the bigger picture, what has changed for you? Why has America now joined calls for an immediate ceasefire in the region, whereas previously it appeared to be in full support of everything that Benjamin Netanyahu's government was doing? What do you attribute that to? What do you think has changed? Because the fear I tried to express to you long before Chuck Schumer more or less said exactly the same thing, albeit from a position of much greater authority and experience. The thing I tried to say to you was that the hemorrhaging of support and even love for the modern state of Israel was becoming a very real and present danger. And all you have to do is talk to young people or look at what young people are saying. Look at what public opinion in general around the world is saying. And Benjamin Netanyahu has run a very real risk, and in some ways it may already be too late. He has run a very real risk of turning Israel into a pariah state that nobody understands the actions of. Part of the problem, in my humble opinion, is the nature of discourse, the allegations of antisemitism and Jew hatred, because it means that the conversation doesn't get conducted in an open and honest fashion. Journalists, commentators, pundits censor themselves. You want to go and have a studio debate about it, you'll have to be prepared to sit opposite somebody who is supremely comfortable with Gaza being razed to the ground, the grey areas, the people who refuse to feel more sorrow at a Jewish death than they do at a Palestinian death, or more sorrow at a Palestinian death than they do at an Israeli death. They should be the only people engaged in this conversation when it comes to analysis. You can get a government spokesperson, and you can, if you must, get a Hamas spokesperson. But if you want to speak for the ordinary people of Gaza or the ordinary people of Israel, you have to listen to people that want peace. And the conversation seems to have been dominated by people who don't want peace. And that, for me, includes Benjamin Netanyahu and Hamas. And that's a tragedy. And that's the way it's gone. So, what's changed? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. I want you to tell me why not just America has now moved its weight behind calls for a ceasefire that it was not long ago quite diametrically opposed to, but also I would love to talk to you. And I find these conversations so much more interesting than the more traditional ones where people whose position will never shift in a million years just shout at each other. I would love to know what you think about this as someone who has followed it without having a personal investment in the issue. The phrase we normally use here is skin in the game or a dog in the race. Somebody who doesn't have historical affiliation either to the people of Gaza or the people of Israel. Somebody who follows it in perhaps the same way that you may follow other conflicts elsewhere in the world or other terrorist atrocities responded to by sovereign governments. Somebody who doesn't come at it with a loyalty already established, or even with a sympathy already established. I'd love to hear where your thoughts and opinions have gone on this. But we'll start with the obvious question, which I don't think has obvious answers, except possibly cynical points at the looming elections in America, which may well be part of the calculation. Let's find out. But the failure for any of us to have pinpointed how much would be too much. For Benjamin Netanyahu, we now know we've gone past the point of too much for Joe Biden, for Antony Blinken, for Chuck Schumer. Though that some of the numbers that may be relevant, 1.1 million people in Gaza currently struggling with catastrophic hunger and starvation. The death toll believed to be in excess of 30,000, 1.7 million people displaced. I'll say that again because sometimes the numbers are almost too big to comprehend. 1.7 million people displaced, 30-odd thousand people killed. And then, of course, the other numbers matter too. 1,200 people killed by Hamas on October the 7th, 253 taken hostage. I think just shy of 32,000, the official number to have been killed in Gaza since Israel launched its retaliatory offensive to eliminate Hamas. You can question those numbers if you want. I don't think you should. I don't think you need to. I think that the fact that the Palestinian deaths are often listed by name is fair, and international news organisations consider them to be reliable. But it doesn't mean I have to, or that you have to. You can insist that they're not true and can't be trusted. And I can remind you that Israel's English language government spokesman has been suspended for an apparent economy with the actuality. So you see how easy it is to say you can't trust anything they say and you can't trust anything they say. But what we do know is this: the point of no support, or the point of no return, or the point of no more has been reached by America, and yet those of us who've been following it from the outside can't really see that anything has changed. So what has changed? 0345 6060 973. 24 after 10. I knew it was the right question to ask, but I'm not sure I ever fully believed that an answer would ever appear. How much will be too much? We all accept Israel must retaliate. Israel must respond to the atrocity of October the 7th. But how much response is too much response? How much retaliation is too much retaliation? And when indeed does response begin to look like revenge? It would appear that America has reached that point, and yet nothing particularly significant has changed. Or has it? I don't know. And alternatively, of course, if you can watch this with an objective eye, how have your positions changed? How has your specific and personal position changed? Chris is in Bexhill to kick things off. Chris, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. When October the 7th happened, I think like the rest of the world, I was horrified. The attack was, it was disgusting. But, when as time's gone on and the way that the operation has been conducted in response, I found myself, falling out of support with Israel as it's been conducted. And, so far now that, I'm in more agreement with, the pro-Palestinian protesters than I guess I've ever been before.
And it's silly to ask in a way, yeah. I'm asking you to describe a switch when what you're describing is a relatively gentle gradient.
Yeah, exactly. It's, I think, when it first happened, no one can question that, any nation would want to defend itself.
Yes.
They'd just been attacked. They had, it made sense that, you would send the military in there to make sure that, this didn't happen again. And I completely understand that. I agree with that. But there's certain standards that I think many of us in the West would expect our militaries to adhere to. That being that you don't attack civilians, you don't bomb refugee camps, you don't bomb people that are trying to flee from a war zone, and you certainly don't stop aid getting to civilians. And those are the things that have pushed me over. It's people.
What else could they have done, though? I mean, I suppose the idea of pursuing Hamas terrorists in Palestine with the same in Gaza with the same care and concern that they would have pursued Hamas terrorists in Israel works for a while. To be absolutely prioritising civilian safety in a way that you don't really, you can't think of many places in the world where that's happened. Well, I suppose the British pursuit of IRA terrorists was largely devoid of anything that could ever have been perceived as collective punishment. But what else could they have done in Gaza itself other than blow up lots of it in the hope of catching some guilty people?
I think the gold standard has to be international law, the Geneva Conventions. We put those in place, I think, after World War II, just
when we did, when there was an
horror.
awful lot of killing of civilians in pursuit of military goals or hoping to catch some bad people. And you're right to mention that, because people who sort of talk about Dresden or talk about some of the atrocities of the Second World War as if that justifies Israel completely overlook the fact that they are the reason why the Geneva Convention exists.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I think it was 1949 was it when they they put those into place, and that's the West doing that. They saw Dresden and they thought, this isn't something that we should do again. The carpet bombings, of civilian.
So it's like it's an incremental process. You mentioned, I think correctly, the sort of scale and the growing clarity of what kind of tactics were being deployed, and there are milestones on that path when we spent a long time being told that the aerial bombardments were being undertaken with surgical precision, and then the number of bombs being dropped, I think they're known as dummy bombs being dropped with no particular care or concern for where they were likely to land at all, became clear. There's been an awful lot of, I can support it because of that, and then a day, a week, a month passes, and it turns out that may not have been entirely true. It may not have been as presented to us in the West, trying to sustain support for what Israel was doing, up to and including probably the ground offensive in Rafah. So months of telling people that if they want to stay safe, they must go here, and now if you want to stay safe, you must go there, and if you still want to stay safe, you better go there, and if you're still alive and you want to stay safe, then please go there. And now we're going to go in there as well. I mean, there isn't a single thing. There isn't a single switch. It's not naive of me to look for one, because we will assemble millions of switches. We'll assemble loads of switches today, and together they create the weight that became heavy enough to change not just public opinion, but America's opinion as well. One of the big things for me is the, and this has been true since the start, but its significance has become more and more pertinent with every passing week. It's been the refusal to let journalists do their job, because you would always reach for the line, if you've got nothing to hide, then you've got nothing to fear. Why not let journalists do their job? Answer, if you don't let journalists do their job, then you can poo-poo and denigrate all reports coming out of that area, and you can get your own version of events incredibly front and centre before what may actually be the truth has got its trousers on. Which brings us back to the suspension of the chap who's been on pretty much every TV and radio programme under the sun, making claims that must now perhaps be reviewed, given that the claims he was making about the ability to get aid into Gaza were, to say the least, questionable. 10:30 is the time. Thomas Watts is here with your headlines. 10:34 is the time, and the question is relatively straightforward. What has changed? Why has America gone from being opposed to UN calls for a ceasefire in Gaza to being the architect of the latest one? And of course, by asking how America has changed, I I advertise my interest in how you have changed and why you have changed. And of course, peace protests on the streets of London will continue for as long as the conflict or the killing continues. And they're very interesting as well. I've been speaking to a lot of people that have been on them. And again, this notion of the traditional media abandoning the public on these issues, partly because of the horror, really, that a journalist or a commentator will feel when accused of antisemitism or Jew hatred. If you go along to one of these marches and search desperately for people saying disgusting things and waving disgusting banners, you will find them, I think. I think you will. And if you then post it online and you get the prevailing wind behind you, it will go viral. But we can address that. We can talk about that being disgusting. We can help the police find the culprits. To try to malign 20, 30, 40,000 people as being hate marchers, or the people that have professed, and I told you this was going to happen, people who have claimed that they were speaking from a place of friendship and allyship for Israel, have accelerated Benjamin Netanyahu's transformation of the current country into a pariah state in the minds of so many members of the public. And that's just one example. You don't want friends like Suella Braverman. You really don't. If you want peace, because there's a tone of bigotry that might today find a target among Muslims, but 10 years ago, 100 years ago, and 10 years from now, precisely the same bigotry being practiced by precisely the same bigots will once again find its target among Jews. One of the most depressing things about this is how easy, because of the 20 years training I've had in this job, how easy it is to see it. A lot of the people professing great support for Israel do so through a profound hatred of Muslims. And a profound hatred of Muslims is as irrational as a profound hatred of Jews. Islamophobia, I even complain about use of the word, the kind of people I'm talking about, is as irrational and as sick as antisemitism. But here they are, all of the people with an irrational hatred of Muslims queuing up to claim that they have a deep and considered support for the state of Israel. Why? I don't know. Is it because Benjamin Netanyahu has killed 30-odd thousand people in Palestine? I don't know, but I do know this. Something's changed. What is it for you? Varuna is in Burford, a beautiful part of the world. Varuna, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Yeah, so I'd like to share my thoughts on this. So I think we've got to also consider that there's various Jewish lobby groups who got influenced with the U.S. government, like IPAC. And I think they've come to the realization that Benjamin...
Yeah, go on.
Benjamin Netanyahu was actually damaging not only just Israel's reputation, but of the overall Jewish community as well.
Well, this is what the sort of Pandora's box that Chuck Schumer answered, I think, or opened rather last week, I think.
Yeah. So the Jewish community, they've got a beautiful culture, going all the way back. Even their religion, it's really peaceful. But I think what Benjamin Netanyahu is doing is actually a lot more harm to the Jewish community. And I think IPAC has come to that realization. I'd also like to share some thoughts on how the word antisemitism is sort of trying to stifle the conversation or blaming of the Israeli government, because I feel like no matter what, the general community in the world, they're going to feel some sort of...
hang on, let me find you an example. I'm just going to go to my inbox because I don't want anyone to think I'm exaggerating. Just bear with me one moment. Okay, here's one. This is from, it's signed in full. It's from someone called Kate Crane. Why not try obsessing about all the other atrocities going on around the world? Why are you obsessed with Israel? I think Kate, by accident, describing what Israel's doing in Gaza as an atrocity. I suspect if she'd read it before pressing send, she may have not quite used that word, but she adds, there are other wars going on. This is why you are perpetuating anti-Semitism. Please stop. You are going to get more people killed by Hamas. So by describing what Israel is doing, we're going to get more people killed by Hamas. And by focusing upon a country whose tactics are currently supported by our own government, using weapons that we have sold, then we should instead be talking about atrocities being undertaken elsewhere in the world by countries and governments that are not supported by our own, and that, therefore, is anti-Semitic. Now, the point is, she believes that. I think she believes that. So it's not just an insult that's designed to stifle my completely fact and evidence-based commentary. She honestly believes that it's anti-Semitic to say these things about Israel for reasons that have got nothing to do with intellect and everything to do with emotion.
Yeah, and I think we're not doing fair by the actual Jewish community by diluting the meaning of the word anti-Semitism. And I think it takes away the focus from what Jewish people are actually going through when they use that word to describe when people oppose what the Israeli government
Please stop killing
doing.
Palestinian children. Don't be so anti-Semitic. Why haven't you mentioned the hostages? Please stop killing Palestinian children, and please, God, release the hostages. Am I still anti-Semitic? And in the minds of people like Kate, I guess we are. I guess everybody is, except the people who want the killing to continue until that unspecified point that we haven't yet been able to articulate. So what was it for you? When did you find yourself thinking this is too much?
I think it was, I've been following this for a very long time, but I think the turning point for me was the response straight after the October 7th attacks, which I'd like to remind were very atrocious, and it's a big loss to the Jewish community. But I think the turning point for me was that. But it's also important to realize that the approach that the Israeli government took with their military operations was completely wrong. I mean, they could have done a coordinated, targeted operation without just carpet bombing Gaza. I mean, they've got special forces. They've got the best special forces in the world, if I say so. I mean, why couldn't they have used them to carry out urban warfare? Yes, there might be losses for the Israeli military.
Instead, the perception of indiscriminate killing became increasingly hard to resist, while Benjamin Netanyahu continued, even in the last few days, to claim that Israel was doing more than any other country in history to protect civilian life. And you know, that is when the suspension of the English language government spokesman, who's been popping up in every single corner of the UK media, perhaps assumes a slightly different light. If the actual Prime Minister of the country can make claims that seem to be at odds with observable reality, how shocked can we be when official spokesmen do the same? And I don't know whether it's fear of insult, fear of accusation that prevents some journalists from at least asking these questions. Maybe not. Very important to ask questions. For example, Henry Riley joins me now. What were you doing at that fish and chip? I'm joking. Well, we're here to discuss Frank Hester, I believe, and the latest development in that story.
Yes, so this is...
Would you like salt and vinegar with that?
No, I'm fine, thank you. This is very serious. This is West Yorkshire Police confirming that they are now investigating the remarks made by that Tory donor to Diane Abbott. Now, Frank Hester alleged to have said in a meeting in Horsforth in Leeds in 2019 that independent MP Diane Abbott made you, quote, want to hate all black women, and said that the MP should be shot. Again, alleged remarks. And these comments were unearthed by the Guardian newspaper just over a week ago on the 11th
Still
of March.
undenied.
Still, well, yes, exactly. But still alleged at this stage, but you're quite right,
course.
still undenied. We know Mr Hester's donated at least £10 million to the Conservative Party this year. There is still that unconfirmed report from Tortoise, which we won't know about until further donations are published in June, as to whether there is an extra £5 million that would bring it to £15 million in
still
total.
undenied.
Again, still undenied. In a statement, the police force have said they're working to establish the facts to ultimately ascertain whether a crime has been committed. They've also confirmed it was the first time that the comments had been brought to their attention. So whilst this did take place in 2019, they were unaware of it until it was on the front page of The Guardian. What is also interesting, I think, James, is it's clear they want to hear from people who were directly in that meeting. West Yorkshire Police saying, as we continue our inquiry, we're keen to hear from anyone who could directly assist our investigation. I take that as wanting some first-hand reports from people who are actually there. But the politics of this, James, is very interesting. This could not happen at a worse time for Rishi Sunak. He is launching the Conservatives' local election campaign today. He's due to be on his feet at some point within the next hour. A week's a long time in politics, as we know. This, I sense, started to go away, started to die down, those calls, including from the Conservative Mayor, Andy Street, by the way, to return the money from Frank Hester. Those remarks, those calls are clearly going to be back at the forefront now. Rishi Sunak, on a day where he'd like to be talking about his local election campaign, will undoubtedly be asked about this. Of course, we've seen ministers get into a bit of a muddle on this as well, James. Kemi Badenoch was the first to describe it as racist, then earlier this week said to Nick Ferrari that actually, in fact, it was trivia, the row with regards to Frank Hester. Just lastly, important to say, no sense of guilt at this point, no suggestion of charges. This is just an investigation that is taking place. But then, of course, there will be questions, I imagine, with regards to Diane Abbott and whether she gets the Labour whip back. That was, again, starting to die down as this story went on. And then lastly, we still haven't heard from Mr. Hester with regards to these comments, but we do have his statement from last week where he accepts he was rude about Diane Abbott in a private meeting several years ago, but his criticism had nothing to do with her gender nor the colour of her skin, he says.
When he said that she made him hate all black women and he wanted her to be shot.
And the MP should be shot.
Yeah. Does this have to happen if someone brings a complaint? Do we know that? Neither of us have got the legal training, have we? But because sometimes it gets reported as the police are investigating it, but there's a sort of statutory requirement to investigate things if certain types of complaints are made. Or has there been a threshold that West Yorkshire Police decide has been crossed, an investigatory threshold?
Well, I know that, so this was initially referred to the specialist, to one of the specialist units of the Metropolitan Police who were initially dealing with this. I'm not entirely sure as to who's brought this complaint, whether there is that threshold, but I know that it's come about as a result of that Metropolitan Police investigation as well. So they're not the first force to look into this, but probably the most significant development we've had so far.
And as you say, it could not have come at a worse time for Rishi Sunak. Thank you very much indeed, Henry Riley. On the question of Conservatives and cash, perhaps you'd like to play this game as well. How much do you think James Cleverly, the Foreign Secretary, spent on a flight to Rwanda to sign a new treaty with Rwanda over the as yet undeported asylum seekers before flying back home again? How much of our money do you think he spent? Do you think he spent A, £1,650, B, £16,500, bearing in mind, it's not somewhere that Ryanair flies to yet, or was it C, £165,000 of our money for the Foreign Secretary to fly to Rwanda and back for 10 minutes to sign yet another deal with Rwanda about asylum seekers that have not yet been deported? Do you want to give me your answer off air? Off air.
Okay, yeah, fine.
I would do it off because I know I want to build up some suspense and some tension. It's 10:47. 10:51 is the time. A, £1,650 for James Cleverly to fly to Kigali for just a one-day round trip to sign a deal that was made necessary, a new deportation deal that was made necessary after our own Supreme Court found that Rwanda was an unsafe country. He took a TV crew with him, so, maybe that constitutes value for money in your mind. Or was it £16,500 or was it £165,000? I asked you a few moments ago. And the answer is, well, actually, there's some interesting contributions to this conversation. One of you flew recently to South Africa and back in business class. So you only paid £12,000. Someone's going to check that now. I want to find the original tweet. So you'd think probably 15,000. What class was it? Upper class, £15,000 to South Africa and back. So that gives you a ballpark idea of how much it might have cost. But no, the answer inevitably perhaps is £165,561, chartering a private jet for a one-day round trip to Rwanda to sign a deal made necessary by their failure to get their own ludicrous plan through a British court. So trebles all round. Graham Knight likes it. He says it was £165,000 and it was money well spent. Graham's the kind of voter that they're going for. He also thinks that the in excess of £2 million that they've currently spent on legal bills to try to get this off the ground, if you pardon the pun. I'm sure he also thinks that's good money. And the estimated £2 million per person that it's likely to cost if we ever get the first 300 out of the UK into Rwanda. And of course, as we discovered yesterday, that could well include, because these are the amendments that the Lords is still seeking to review, that could well include people who worked to support the British Army in trouble spots around the world. Afghan translators, for example. Yep, they got to go. Or people who have been victims of modern slavery. Yep, can't be looking after them. We've got to be able to send everybody there, everybody we want. Even if it's £2 million a pop, for people like Graham, it's excellent value for money. 10:53 is the time. back to matters Middle Eastern. In fact, we return to the Middle East a little later in the programme with an interesting report about the prospects of Rishi Sunak betting on the Middle East to perhaps shore up some of the failures in talks with Canada and sluggish progress with India. We've got some interesting developments in that field for you later in the programme, which again, you possibly won't be reading in the kind of newspapers currently obsessed with embroidery on the back of an England shirt, which we will also be talking about a little later in the programme. But first, back to the Middle East, back to this question of, well, if America can change, America has shifted from opposition to ceasefire to call for ceasefire, indeed drafting a UN resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire, the return of the hostages, and a massive, massive uptick in the amount of aid making its way into Gaza, where over 1 million people now are believed by the UN to be facing starvation. It's changed for America. Why? But also, why has it changed for you? Sam's in Redbridge. Sam, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi there, James.
Hello, Sam.
As I was mentioning before, actually, I don't think it's got anything to do with America now deciding that enough is enough. I think it's purely a strategic move. I think they knew exactly what to do, when to do, because, the Israeli lobbyist is very strong in America. America 3-4 months ago, the world superpower could have said there and then, enough is enough now. We've got, thousands already dead. You need to stop this now. We need to call for a ceasefire. It didn't. And now I feel that because there's now no point of return for the Palestinians, which they know, they're not dumb, now they can say to the world, they can be the good guy and say, okay, now we need to have a ceasefire. But what is the point of a ceasefire? You've got millions of people now displaced. You've got, thousands dead. You've got children being maimed, they've had all sorts of horrible things done to them, to their parents, to their family, their loved ones. And now I just feel as though, why are they now looking to be the good guys? Well, probably because, they know now they've got enough, there's
what do you
no
think
point
they
of return.
thought? What do you think they thought was going to happen? They thought that Netanyahu would reach a point where he felt enough had been done, or they thought, because I think one of the most dispiriting things is that for most people watching who don't have a historical affiliation to either population, for most people watching, everything that's happened since the beginning of November feels grimly predictable and close to inevitable. Yes.
We're living in an age now, James, where we've got facial recognition technology. If Israel wanted to use that, they could have, took out Hamas. I'm sure, just like that, they could have worked with other intelligence.
I don't know that that's true. I think the nature of tunnels, the nature of guerrilla warfare, the nature of terrorism means it's not a binary battlefield. They could certainly have done a hell of a lot more to protect civilian life, but I don't know that it was quite as easy as you portray.
Okay, it's not as black and white, perhaps, but I'm sure they've got so many things at their disposal that could have, prevented them from using thousands of bombs. And I'm sure America could have really encouraged them from the beginning to, use these other sources of, like warfare.
So here it is then. No, this is it. This is where you've taken me. You've got the tension between people who fear that Netanyahu, Israel, don't really care how many Palestinians they kill. And now, to be generous, in pursuit of Hamas, but there are certainly people in his cabinet who don't care how many Palestinians die, even if it wasn't in pursuit of Hamas. We know that because they've talked about nuclear bombs. And then you would, as a friend and ally of Israel, you would say, no, that's not true. They have to respond. They must retaliate. But it's not true that they don't care how many people die. And then that little voice in everybody's mind just gets louder and louder over the last few months saying, well, maybe they don't care. And some of the actions that Netanyahu has undertaken, some of the rhetoric that's coming out of his cabinet, so some of the commentary that we've seen adds to the fear that maybe they don't care. Yes,
I've always said that from the very beginning because, we're all against Hamas, what they did, okay? And as a Muslim, I can say that from the bottom of my heart. We Jewish people are our cousins in the religion. So, I'm fed up now with the whole media trying to put a spin, the politicians trying to pit us against us and them. It's not. We've got thousands of Jewish people. That's
the gravest mistake. The gravest mistake our media has made is turn it into a binary issue, which it isn't for normal people.
It's not, no. And, I'm not going to fall for that trap anymore. It's like white against black. No, we shouldn't. We all need to work together. We actually, care about each other, I'm sure. So why do we have to feel as though, we have to be against each other? It just doesn't make any sense.
And if you go on a march for peace, then you're basically a terrorist sympathiser. It is extraordinary. I think you're right. I think that is it. That sense that you can no longer win the conversation. You can no longer prevail in a conversation about whether or not there is a limit to what Benjamin Netanyahu is prepared to contemplate. And if you feel that conversation is over, then you have to call for him to stop. I think that's probably it. It's not, a textbook. No one's going to win a PhD for that kind of insight, but it fits all of the available facts in a way that other explanations don't quite. It's coming up to 11 o'clock. Becky's been in touch. She says, literally my job to book global travel for executives. Please tell me how you managed to spend 6 figures on a return flight to Rwanda. Please, 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 I beg you. That, I suspect, is because Becky works on commission. 3 minutes after 11 is the time, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Coming up a little later in the programme, Prince Harry's back in court, or at least his lawyers are back in court, and continuing our fine tradition of reporting on the stuff that newspapers obsessed with embroidery on the back of football shirts are less likely to be interested in. We'll be catching up with his legal advisor a little later, or one of his team a little later in the programme, to find out what the latest developments are, and the cynical and completely transparent attempt to keep you listening when you may be tempted not to, part 364. The scientists have done some research into what teenagers smell of. Have you seen this? It's real. Apparently, when you hit adolescence, teenage boys in particular develop aromas that are identifiable. They develop, to coin a phrase, identifiable aromas. It's not pretty. I've got to tell you, it's not good reading. I've got 4 things on my list. The Times reports it thus. Any parent will know that the aroma of their son or daughter's room can be less than pleasant, but scientists in Germany have now found that these smells are caused by different levels of particular chemicals in teenagers. They're looking at young people between 14 and 18, and they're finding chemicals present in the teenagers that are not present in infants, steroids effectively. And they have very specific smells, which scientists have distilled into 4 areas. Now, I have texts available on 84850. You can tweet at LBC. I'd rather you didn't tweet me personally on this because it will turn my feed into a skip fire, but I can't, of course, stop you. And I now have WhatsApp. What's that you say? Yes, I've got WhatsApp under 03456060973. Now, you are not allowed to look this up. That do not play the game, okay, if you already know the answer, if you have come across this story already. I promise you I'll make it fun for you, but you can't join in because you will spoil the science that I'm about to do. I'm about to do some science. Are you ready for some science? I'm doing science. What do you think the smells are? There are 4 specific smells, okay, that scientists have identified teenagers genuinely smell more of than younger people. And I think it gets better as you get older as well. But 4 very, very, actually 5 smells. And I want you to tell me what you think they are. Ben has got a brain exactly like mine. Do you know what Ben's just said? He said, didn't Kurt Cobain write a song about this? And I said to Eleanor this morning, I said, if this was 1974 and we were doing radio phone-in topics and decided that playing an appropriate piece of musical accompaniment was a productive use of our time and entertaining for you, we could use Smell Like Teen Spirit by Nirvana. And Ben's had exactly the same thought, although as Eleanor pointed out, the lyrics of Smells Like Teen Spirit don't really lend themselves to a conversation about what teenagers smell like. But good thinking, Ben. I knew this was going to be funny, and I can't read out half of the words that have already popped up in my... Links is a good one from Jenny. No, it's chemically occurring, Jenny. It's not stuff they spray onto themselves. So you can't have African savanna or whatever the current flavours of Lynx may be. Yeah, I'm going to struggle to control this, aren't I? It's okay, well, we'll work on the technology while we get stuck into the rather more serious element of this hour of the programme. This is quite good from Ryrie. Nando's, Monster Energy drinks and watermelon vapes. Look, I tell you again, it's it's naturally occurring aromas that come out of teenagers, all right? It's not. It's just smells, right? 5 things. No one's going to get all 5, but I would be interested to see what you think might be contenders. Now, I promised you yesterday that we would return to this subject, but I was not expecting to return to it quite so quickly. But something happened which reminded me of conversations that we'd had in the rather more distant past, and they became the lens through which I looked at the conversation that we had yesterday. Also, I noticed that the right-wing media has gone where perhaps we expected it to go yesterday, if not necessarily quite so quickly. And I refer to the very deliberate targeting of people who are suffering with their mental health, people with poor mental health, being very deliberately targeted by Rishi Sunak's government and their client journalists for attack, for being accused of either fecklessness or dishonesty. The cost of sickness benefits will rise by more than a third by the end of the decade as Britain's worklessness crisis deepens, reports the Daily Telegraph today, turning it very, very much into the fault of the people who are sick, as opposed to either the fault of the people who have made them sick, in which case the architects of 14 years of austerity would probably be fairly near the top of the list, because the relationship between poverty and mental health is absolutely proven. But also, of course, inviting the rest of us to hate on these people, because why should we be paying for their care when they spend all their time in Ibiza and they spend all their money on flat-screen televisions and Tennent's Super Lager and silk-cut cigarettes? I may have lifted that somewhat wholesale from radio programmes of 10 years ago. But the reason I'm going to return to it very quickly, the reason I'm going to return to it today, in fact, is because I was reminded by a tweet of the work of a charity that I have done quite a lot of work with over the years. And that charity deals with military veterans. Now, the military veterans popped up quite a bit on the programme yesterday, particularly the final caller, who very much reminded us that the portrayal of people with poor mental health as needing to somehow toughen up or man up was obnoxious on every imaginable level. But it gave me some thoughts that I'll share with you in a minute. I'll just tell you first what they had to say, what my friends at Combat Stress had to say about the Work and Pension Secretary Mel Stride trying to essentially stigmatise people with poor mental health. They wrote that promoting a narrative that people who are unwell are being overly sensitive or exaggerating their symptoms is a damaging rhetoric that risks further stigmatising mental health and deterring people from seeking help. While every issue should be addressed on a case-by-case basis, it is vital that we ensure those who are struggling with their mental health receive the treatment and support they need. And given the work that Combat Stress does, they point out the particular relevance to veterans with complex mental health problems such as PTSD. Now, listen to this. Many tell us they don't feel deserving of support or don't believe that effective help is available to them. That it takes on average 13 years after leaving the military for veterans to seek help for their mental health is evidence of this. Left untreated, PTSD can worsen, leading to loss of job, home, family, and in some cases, slightly, I hope, obvious trigger warning here as well for you, in some cases even suicide. And the final line, which could have been lifted almost verbatim from our conversations yesterday, what people with mental health issues need is compassion, empathy, and the right support, not cynicism and criticism. And it occurred to me that our way to help in this matter would be to talk to people who can't believe that it's happened to them. Do you know there's another story around about poverty today, about this government, this parliament, that makes it even more specific, doesn't it, than the notion of government. This parliament has presided over I'll get the details exactly right for you, but the biggest rise in poverty, the largest increase in material deprivation and food insecurity in history. This is work from the Institute of Fiscal Studies looking at the real incomes of the poorest third of households. And they have reached the worst levels. It puts this parliament firmly on course to be the worst for living standards since records began in 1961. Apropos nothing in particular, James Cleverly just spent £165,000 on a return flight to Kigali to sign a new treaty necessitated only by the failure of his own government to get their legislation through the UK Supreme Court, a profoundly British court. So what we do sometimes with stories about poverty is try to confine the conversation to people who can't believe that the conversation is about them. And that works really well. And I want to try to do the same today with mental health. So yesterday, the lines were open to everybody, and correctly they were. And we heard from people who have struggled with their mental health forever. We heard from people who have not received the help that they so obviously need and deserve. We heard from people for whom life essentially has been an eternal struggle. And we will talk to you again. We will listen to you again. You know that we will. I don't need to promise you. We have done in the past and we will do in the future. But I want today to tempt you to call me if you can't believe it's happened to you. I mean, my almost ideal contributor would be the person who would have watched television in the past and sided with the people claiming that this was all a load of nonsense, would have sided with the people claiming that it was just an exaggeration, sided with Mel Stride and his claim that the normal ups and downs of life are now being described as mental health problems. I want to speak to people. I want you to call me if you didn't really deep down believe that this stuff existed, or that if it did, then you're talking about people who thought they were Napoleon Bonaparte. That the idea of poor mental health was so utterly alien to you that you, through no fault of your own, and I want to stress that, I really, really want to stress that, through no fault of your own, given the poison being poured into your ears and the encouragement, and my God, it's about to get a hell of a lot worse. Of that you can be certain. You just thought it was either lead swinging, or exaggeration, or that'll do, lead swinging or exaggeration, or just something that only happened to. There we go. So it was either lead swinging, which is a nice figure of speech for lying, people lying because surviving on statutory sick pay in this country is akin to living in clover, apparently. So it was either people lying, people exaggerating, like the system almost exaggerating, or crucially, poor mental health was something that never happened to people like you. And I was close to the final category. I'd never really struggled with my mental health in a medical sense. I mean, we all do in some ways, but today we're talking about people compelled to go to the doctors. But I did end up in therapy for complicated reasons. And I went to therapy as a complete skeptic, a complete cynic. You've heard this story before, so I shall give you the shortened version. If you haven't heard it before, there's a book. There's always a book, isn't there? But I went along because I wasn't being the person I wanted to be in a very difficult personal context. I was somehow unable to provide the sort of support that was needed from me. And the reason for that was because of how I had approached my life, how I dealt with trauma in my childhood and allowed it to turn me into someone who was in a state of what is known as permanent vigilance or constant vigilance. So, listen, you probably think I'm quite punchy now, right, on the wireless, and I can sometimes really perhaps reach for the sledgehammer when what's needed is a scalpel. But I used to be almost unbearable. It's a miracle I stayed on air. I used to tear the head off everything that moved in front of me. And, of course, that wasn't just happening in my professional life. I would be like that in shops, or I don't mean I was shouting or raging or anything like that, but I was always very quick to destroy whatever problem was in front of me with my caustic wit or with my tongue. And the corollary of that was a belief that you could talk yourself into fitness and health. So if you were feeling sad or you were feeling low, come on, get on with it, come on. It's a boarding school thing. Most lads who went to boarding school are a bit like this. So it ties in with conversations we had at the end of last week about the kind of schools that I went to. And it can protect you. You can even thrive as a consequence of having these attributes. But then when you need them, they're great. When you really, really don't need them, you can't get rid of them. So my experience in therapy was absolutely extraordinary, in that the therapist said to me, we're going to do some work with your younger self, with little you. And I thought she was crackers. I just gave it that smile. You know that smile? Do you do that smile? Do you do that smile? You just go, oh, yes. Yes. Don't look in my eyes. If you look in my eyes, you'll see what I think about this. I've told you before that it was around this time that I found myself at a dinner party with a woman who'd had a caffeine enema, which is exactly what you think it is, a caffeine enema. And if you had told me that a caffeine enema would help me address some of the things I was trying to address at the time that I went to therapy, I probably would have had a caffeine enema. Thankfully, it never came to that. I'd never be able to look at my espresso in quite the same way again. But I thought she was daft when she said you're going to talk to your younger self, you're going to look after your younger self. And what happened was that the prospect of being beaten as a child, which it turned out had affected me a lot more than I'd ever admitted to myself, was a large part of my problem, because I'd spent my whole life convincing myself that being beaten as a child hadn't done me any harm at all. It hadn't hurt me at all. There's emotional abuse as well from teachers at both of my schools, but particularly the physical. 10 years old, putting your hands out in front of you, 6'3" man hits them as hard as he can with a specially designed weapon. And I did the usual shtick that I'd done always in those contexts. I said, she said, were you beaten at school? And I said, yes, I was actually, a lot. At one point I held a record. And I'm doing my usual joking about it. At one point I held a record. And she goes, well, that must have hurt. And no one had ever said that to me before. And I started doing what I would have done in the past, which was to deny it. So she said, well, that must have hurt. And I'd go, well, no. Yeah, actually it did. It really hurt. She said, that wasn't fair, was it? I said, on you, on him. I said, no, it really wasn't. And she goes, well, why don't you tell him? I end up having a conversation with a cushion. And the cushion represents 10-year-old me. And it was one of the most liberating and extraordinary moments of my entire life. And I mention it only because I didn't think stuff like that happened to people like me. Not tough people who can argue their way out of anything, and people who have always been able to talk about my feelings, but it turned out not in the way that I needed to. So if you are someone who has had poor mental health, but you grew up believing that things like that didn't happen to people like you, we need to hear your voice today. Because the rest of us, we're going to need ammunition to deal with people like Mel Stride and to deal with the Daily Telegraph and the Murdoch Press and the Daily Mail, because they are lining up their tanks on the lawns of the unwell now. They are turning people with poor mental health into the new immigrants. You are going to be the people responsible for economic bad news. You are going to be the people responsible for council bankruptcies, council cuts. You are already struggling. And the only way they're going to get away with this is if we let them. And in order to at least mount a decent rearguard offensive, to at least put up some form of barricades, we need to recognize that it can happen to everybody and it can happen to anybody. And you can do that. You can do that by telling me about the journey you took from a place where you didn't think it happened to people like you to the place where it did. And David, you are a man after my own heart as you hear me share that story, not for the first time. It makes me cry as well whenever I see that scene in Good Will Hunting where Robin Williams' character says it's not your fault. That's the first lesson you need to learn. It's not your fault. And what the government is doing, and this is disgusting, and I know I've gone on longer than I should have done, but the single most important thing you need to understand when you're dealing with mental health, the single most important thing, I believe, and I'm not a professional, that prompts recovery is you have to get over the idea that it's your fault. You have to recognize and understand that it's not your fault. You wouldn't blame yourself if you broke your leg. You wouldn't think there was something wrong with you if you had a broken leg. You'd just have a broken leg and you'd get the help you need to fix it and you'd be back on your feet. It's not your fault. And the government, Mel Stride, the Daily Telegraph, the Daily Mail, all of the usual suspects, they are queuing up now to tell everybody else that it is your fault. And I'm not going to let them, but I will need your help. Do you know, that's thrown me completely, and we got through the whole of yesterday's programme without picking up on that. Thank you, David. The whole point of mental health treatment and mental health care begins with the insistence that it's not your fault, and the right-wing media and the Conservative government, the people who brought you Liz Truss, Boris Johnson, Brexit, Rishi Sunak, austerity, are now setting their sights on people with poor mental health and telling them not only that it is their fault, but that it is it is their fault that the country is suffering. I can't. I think this is bigger than even we realised. But enough from me. I've gone on for ages, and I do apologise. Carl's in Manchester. Carl, what made you pick up the phone?
First of all, I felt called out. I think you kind of explained me to a T. I'm going to put my hands up and say I was one of them people who didn't understand mental health and just assumed it was a cop-out.
Go on.
Just to say the words poor mental health, it was, the people I came into contact who had mental health issues didn't work, didn't do this, and I just assumed there was just another excuse for them to be as they are.
Yes.
And I had nothing really to conflict it, to give me another side. Until about 4.5 years ago. So my situation was that I was in a breakup from the family home.
Yeah.
And very, very quickly my mental health plummeted. And it was scary.
What does that mean, Carl? What does that mean for people? So imagine you from 10 years ago is listening to this, and you've just said my mental health plummeted, and old Carl has gone, what's he on about? What does that even mean? What does it mean?
So this would take me from someone who does entertainment, do a bit of stand-up comedy in my spare time, and is quite the extrovert and the go-to person that people speak to when they need cheering up, to someone who was physically sick at the thought of leaving the house.
Wow.
Like shaking, needing a chaperone friend to go to the supermarket, and to believing that the world would be a better place if I wasn't here.
Oh, man. And good Lord. And it is, because I can ask you to describe it, but we can never rationalise it, can we? That's the whole flipping point. It's not going to make sense. You can see causes and contributing factors, but it's as if you were just stripped raw and you couldn't deal with the pain that you'd never noticed before.
Absolutely. It was alien to me. And one of the things that I do like is that I'm quite a solution finder when there's an issue.
Yeah.
But my judgment becomes so clouded, and no matter what anyone says, it didn't sink in. The words were coming across, but nothing was resonating. Nothing was staying with me going, well, actually, that's right what they're saying. My mind was only focused. And it apologies to anyone who listened, it did lead to an attempt on my own life.
Okay.
Within a couple of months.
Really? So the decline was incredibly rapid.
Oh, I've likened it as to falling off the top of Everest.
Yeah.
It's a slow fall up to get to a happy place, but the fall can be instant. And I've come away from that now. For me, it was a situational thing that within kind of, 12 months, I was back to what I feel is myself, but a new and improved version in that I've got such now a respect for mental health that I never even had before, because...
Well, you have to.
It's a scary, scary thing. I now, I'm constantly checking in on people and all the rest of it, and I feel like I need to try and play my part back again, because I'm, anyone was to look at me and say, are you okay? And I'll be like, yeah, I'm absolutely fine. Great, how are you?
I am. Yeah, of course I am.
No issues. And I know we talk about it a lot, but I think men especially are very, very well at masking it.
We've been taught to be, Carl. That's how we were raised. They'd stiff up a lip if you're posh, and I don't know, but pull up your boots if you're not. That's how it works.
And anything else is a sign of weakness.
Of course it is. That's what they tell us, and that's what these mad Tories still seem to believe. So God knows what damage it's done to them, or what damage has been done to them. But they're still in the mode that you were in before your relationship broke down, and they're now trying to inflict that warped worldview on everybody else. What help did you get? You don't have to tell me. I'm just
I don't mind. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about the event, but I didn't leave any notes for anyone. There was no cries for help or anything. I kind of took myself to one side and was met by someone passing by before it was too late, type of thing. But Lord. It was. I then went to a facility over in Merseyside for a couple of weeks to kind of realise exactly what it was, and first of all that it was okay to feel like that.
Yeah, and it's not your fault. It's not your fault.
That was the thing. It was they took the blame away. They said, listen, because I was it becomes a cycle. You end up getting so upset at yourself, and then you become so kind of remorseful, and then with that, then you feel that an action needs to be put in place, and it's so self-destructive.
Of course it is, but mate, you're making perfect sense of it. You really are.
But they intervened and really, kind of helped me establish my own self-worth.
That's a beautiful way of putting it, and that's treatment. If it was your leg that was broken or your neck that was broken, the conversation we're having now would be of a completely different order. But it was your mind.
They did give me medication as well to help me,
of course,
which I was very sceptical about. But within 12 months, they said, we feel like you can come away from these now. Yeah. And do you know what? People have said to me, I don't believe in the medication, it's a placebo. Well, do you know what it is? So it is, I don't mind.
I have a similar view of people who might be in the category that you began by describing, that people who might, for reasons that you and I would never understand, be choosing to live a sort of emaciated existence on welfare payments because it's preferable to doing a proper day's work. If a few people are like that, that's fine, because if the safety net that they're bouncing around in is the one that catches you, I'd rather keep the safety net than lose them. Thank you very much. That's the way it goes for me as well. That's beautifully put, Carl. Thank you. And it's just important, because that is precisely the sort of scenario that Mel Stride was talking about yesterday. And they'll do what they always do. They'll say, "Oh no, I didn't mean you," like they did with Brexit, like they do with racism, like they do with immigration. "Oh, I didn't mean you. I mean all the other ones, the liars, the ones in the comment section of the Daily Mail. The fella whose window cleaner was married to a woman whose dad was always living in Marbella, even though he was supposedly signed off sick. That's who they mean. They do mean you. I just hope that we'll all be too thick to realise." It's 11:33. Thomas Watts has your headlines. It's 11:37, 2 front pages today, focusing upon poor mental health, but not in the way that a civilised country would. They are essentially trying to portray people seeking help with their mental health as being responsible for the economic ills, most of which, of course, were caused by 14 years of Tory government. So, in our own small way, we try to redress the balance. And one of the best ways to do it, and it won't be the way we do it every time, but today we're doing it by listening to people who can't believe that they are in this category, who grew up and possibly got well into adult life thinking that poor mental health was either exaggerated, lied about, or something that happened to people who are nothing like me, something that happened to different people, not me, not people like me, because that ain't true. And someone needs to explain this to the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions as soon as possible. 11:38 is the time. Dave's in Liverpool. Dave, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Absolutely one of the people that you are talking about. I'm off at the moment. I'm off work. I'm into my second month of being off work, with mental health problems. And one of the things you feel in this situation, James, is absolute despair, guilt, and self-loathing. 3 of the things. Yeah. my issue is I'm a teacher by trade, right, and I've been a teacher for about 32 years now, a high school teacher. Gosh. And so dealing with mental health issues, especially since the pandemic, has been a massive part of the job. Now, from a personal level, as a family, we suffered in 2021 when my son tried to take his own life. I managed to stop him doing that. God. Now, you don't think that's going to happen to you. I certainly didn't think in any universe that was going to happen to us. And it was a direct result of what happened during lockdown. I've got to say, he's in a really good place now. He's at uni. He's living his best life. And he's, I couldn't be happier for him. The thing is about... Well,
that's trauma. That's trauma for you. I mean, this is. I'm just going to slip the Samaritan's number in before you continue, because that's 2 callers who've alluded to attempted suicide, and 116123 is a number where someone will be available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week if any of these issues affect you. There are other organisations, other paths, but the Samaritans are generally the first port of call, and that number again is 116123, or you can just text the word shout to 85258 if you'd rather have an exchange over text. Back to you, Dave.
So you power on, James, because that's the culture that you've been brought up in.
Exactly.
So, listening to you, and I know about you and your background in terms of the private education you received and the culture there, which I can only imagine as a state school kid. But my father was 11 years in the Navy, and so we were brought up with a very similar
approach,
attitude of you work hard, you always work, and you power on through things, and that's what you do. So after our issues with my son, you kind of go back to work, you carry on, you immerse yourself, you're dealing with young people with similar issues and so on. Teachers will always tell you it's much easier to deal with other people's children than your own. But then, sort of 6 weeks ago, a colleague of mine, thankfully, who I was sat opposite the desk in the office with, said to me, "Are you all right, Dave?" And I just said no. And didn't understand why, didn't understand what was going on. I had a chat with the manager, with the head, and somebody asked me, how are you feeling? And that was it. Broke down, couldn't answer. And here I am now, sort of into about the fourth week of therapy, combined with antidepressants. Just been signed off again. Thankfully, I've got a wonderful GP who said to me, and I would say this to anybody who's going through this or thinks they might be, she said to me, you need to accept the place you are, because for people like me, and I suspect there's a lot of people like me out there, you have to accept, rather than looking back saying, how did I get here? And blaming yourself for that, accept where you are and accept the situation that moving forward, how do I get well? And as you said, and this is an analogy that's always used, isn't it? You wouldn't go to work with a broken leg. But it's in our society, in our culture, and especially I'm 56, right? And I think she said to me, actually, the 50-something-year-old men who she's dealing with at the moment, in terms of this. So I would say to anybody out there who's struggling, like myself, get help.
Tell them what they're feeling, if you can. So when you realised, or when your colleague asked you if you were all right, the person listening to this who's not quite sure that we mean him or her, what are we talking about?
A sense of despair, purposelessness, if that's a word.
It is now.
It's a good one for Scrabble. You're feeling of physically, actually. I described a feeling of it was like a constant, almost like a buzzing through my head and my body. Anxiety is immense, but you don't know what it is. You can't put, and that makes you feel like you're going insane. Yeah. So there's any of those really, and the people that will notice are the people closest to you. So, like my wife noticed weeks ago. You talked earlier about how you were, James, in terms of, you might snap at people or have a comeback that was quite cutting. Very similar, very similar. And my fear was that was going to happen at work. And, if it happens with a teenager, you're in trouble. Of course you are. And you don't want to be in that situation.
And it's not really you. It's not, it's not the authentic you. It's the traumatised you.
You can't understand where it's come from. And why you like that. And you also, as well, if you find yourself, as I did, naturally, James, Dave was always a gregarious, confident, outlooking person who, did stuff for fun. And that person had gone, and other people noticed, and you find yourself backing off socially. And if you're doing that now, if you're a person listening to this and you're like doing all those things, and you find yourself withdrawing into yourself, get help. Go to the GP. I'm on this talking therapy thing with the NHS. They put me onto that as well. Yeah. And it's CBT. It's just my processes, whereas you spoke to a cushion.
Yeah. I still find that funny when someone else might find it funny when I say it.
If it works, do it.
If it works, it works. It's like physiotherapy for the mind, isn't it? Really, is a good way of thinking about it. You're just reintroducing your muscles to to the work.
I think so, and I think one of the things that my therapist has said to me is, you need to think out. And I used to say this to the kids at school. Think outside your own thoughts. So imagine you're standing next to yourself and ask yourself, right, well, where's that thought come from? Well, what emotion are you feeling with that thought? And one of the things you can do, which I'm doing now, and if you get into the habit of it, really helps, is saying, okay, well, imagine this was you were in a court of law and a jury were listening to this. What's the evidence for that thought? Because you have unhelpful thoughts that are really,
Of course you do.
And what's the evidence for it? And then ask yourself, right, well, what's the evidence against that? What do you know for a fact that wouldn't? So, say, for example, if you're worried about your spouse or your partner or whatever, and you start to think things like, they don't want me anymore. Who would want me in this state? What's the purpose of this relationship now? Because I'm not contributing anything. Then ask yourself, all right, where's the evidence for that? What's the evidence for it being good? What's the evidence for it being positive? What have you done in the past that's been... You know what I mean?
I do know what you mean. So, you're bringing reason into an unreasonable space. And even sometimes focusing on the imagined conversation takes you out of the black spot that you were in, because you've distracted yourself, regardless of what answers you come up with. You're on the road, aren't you? I think.
Yeah. I think.
Can you feel it?
It's a combination.
Of course.
Yeah, I can, but it's a combination of people need to go. If you're in this place, go to the GP. And like me, I didn't want antidepressants, James, because I never saw an exit ramp.
Yeah.
With people like my son, he's still on them. If they work, they work. Yeah. But there was always a stigma with people my age.
Of course.
But get get them.
Yeah, I think your tone, as much as your words there, made the phrase is no-brainer, isn't it? You got, Christ, it's medicine, man.
Take it,
bloody medicine. It's medicine. It's medicine.
But it's the stigma.
It is, and that's why this story, that's why this week is so grim in the context of what Mel Strider's said and done, and how the usual suspects in the right-wing media have marched in behind him. But you push back against that, Dave. You push back against that beautifully. And most people listening, almost everybody listening, will know who to trust on an issue like this. And I'll give you a clue. It's not Mel Stride. It is 11:52, and we won't be moving on from this immediately, even though we're going to take a brief diversion now, not least because of the profundity and quantity of contributions coming into the studio. But I want to talk about this partly because not enough people are. Prince Harry's lawyers, or the legal case against News Group newspapers, continues. Back in the High Court this week, looking at private information, or claims that they were securing private information on Prince Harry when he was as young as 9 years old, the court has been told. Dr. Evan Harris is, of course, a former director of Hacked Off and a consultant to all of the claimants' legal team in this News Group litigation, and he joins us now for one of our increasingly regular catch-ups. What are the major issues in play here, Evan?
Well, over this 3 days, we've had two separate applications. One on Wednesday, which was by the whole of the claimant group, not just Prince Harry, but 45 other claimants, to amend what are called their generic or common particulars of claim, which means the general allegations they make about the widespread nature of the unlawful activity. So well over 150 separate private investigators, they say, were used by Rupert Murdoch's newspapers against claimants over a 15-year period on thousands of occasions by most parts of those newspapers, the news desk features, showbiz, and so forth. They also, on Wednesday, sought to amend their particulars, and we await judgment, to make allegations that Rupert Murdoch himself knew all about this much earlier than he said he did when he gave evidence at the Leveson inquiry in 2012 and the Media Select Committee in 2011, and that as a result, therefore, he was not giving the true picture in those sworn testimonies and was part of the concealment, the so-called one rogue reporter concealment for a number of years. And we set out why. Now, it's got to be said that Newsgroup, they haven't formally pleaded a defence because it's not been amended in the actual formal pleadings, but they've never accepted that there was any unlawful concealment or destruction of evidence, and obviously they don't accept this, and they don't like it. I was going to say they don't like it Upham, but their response to this was to attack journalists for reporting this court hearing, saying, they're taking advantage of the principle of open justice, which, as a journalist, is crucial to the ability to tell the public what's happening in courts. They're taking advantage of open justice to report these allegations. Well, it's in the public interest to report allegations of this nature against a man who, as you've made clear in your writings and in your broadcast, has so much power and influence over our society and our politicians in particular. I think Keir Starmer was at the Sun yesterday paying homage.
Yes. Bending the knee, some might say. So, I think the public interest case is fairly clear to see to anybody honest. And I mean, you mentioned that they haven't had to offer a defence to this yet, but they will no doubt deny all of the allegations that are being laid before the court. Is it essentially about time, Evan? It's looking at the period that the court is set to examine needs to be bigger for Prince Harry and for other claimants, including, of course, Hugh Grant and Baroness Lawrence?
That's another facet. Just on that point,
right.
You might say it's unfair if someone without a platform has allegations reported about them that are being made without them having to yet do a formal defence that can be cited. But Mr. Murdoch has a decent-sized media platform, and his editors either ignored the allegations or they published these attacks on journalism saying these are scurrilous allegations. And obviously, that's exactly what they said when The Guardian first reported the phone hacking allegations, that they were scurrilous. In terms of Prince Harry, today and yesterday, we have been seeking to amend his particulars of claim to say that there was unlawful activity in 1994-5 when he was a schoolboy, directed against the communications of his mother, Princess Diana, and his father, then Prince Charles, which we say inevitably would have meant that private information about Prince Harry would have been obtained, and his brother would have been obtained by these newspapers. Now, they're resisting that strongly on the basis that it's too late to change that now, and it's a complex legal argument, and we'll see what the judge says. And secondly, he's identified articles in 2016 from his first dates with Meghan Markle, which he says were the Sun instructed a private investigator to carry out unlawful activities. Now, this private investigator, a guy called Dan Hanks, has admitted this. But Newsgroup's position is, even though he's admitted it wrongly. Which is an unusual position. Yes. And then, in fact, what he did was lawful. And in any event, he should go and sue Newsgroup in America, not here where it was published and where he lived at the time. And that he's too late because in America, you've only got a year to bring a claim like this. Again, these are legal arguments, and we'll see what the judge says. But it's quite clear that 5 years after the Leveson inquiry, a private investigator said he was commissioned to carry out unlawful information gathering on Meghan Markle by the Sun 25 years after. Yeah.
What's the timescale now? When do we expect Justice Fancourt to rule on this, on whether the updated claims can be included at a later date?
He says he's not going to be able to do his judgment till May because of other work and the vacation, and so we'll only find out in May because, as I say, these are quite complex.
You're telling me. That's why we're very grateful for your help, as always. Is there much precedent in this kind of space?
Yes, often claimants amend their claim as they go forward. The position is that you shouldn't be frozen in time in terms of what you're allowed to ask the trial judge to determine based on your knowledge at the time that you issue your claim or you first draft your, what are called the particulars, your detailed allegations.
So in layman's terms, stuff has come to light since the original claim was made that the claimants would like to include in the case.
Exactly, or sometimes the judge has said, as he did in these common pleadings, which we dealt with on Wednesday, that if you're going to make allegations, and this happened in the Mirror trial with Piers Morgan, he said, look, if you're going to make allegations against these third parties which are serious, and they were, and you asked me to make findings of dishonesty against people like Piers Morgan, which he did, you have to set it out clearly in the particulars so these individuals know the case they have to answer in case they want to give evidence. And that was done for Piers Morgan, but here we've made clear that the allegations we make that are being made about Rupert Murdoch, James Murdoch, Rebecca Brooks, and others are set out in great detail. Now the other side is saying it's too much detail.
Well, I'm going to quote
too many notes in the symphony, as it were.
Well, I shall quote Anthony Hudson, King's Counsel for News Group newspapers, opposing the changes and saying that they would involve, quotes, wide-ranging, costly and time-consuming investigation of historic allegations. And to be fair, and perhaps ever so slightly contradictory to some of our earlier exchange, that is from a report in the Times newspaper today, which is, of course, owned by Rupert Murdoch. So, May, you say, before we get there?
Yes, and it will be costly, and we say that's a consequence of using 150 private investigators over 15 years. There's a price to pay to investigate allegations of wrongdoing, which are well enough founded for them to have settled 1,300 claims.
While constantly denying any wrongdoing.
Quite.
Dr. Evan Harris, many thanks, former director of Hacked Off and consultant to the claimants legal team, which, as you heard, runs to over 40 claimants, although Prince Harry, the best known. They also include the actor Hugh Grant and the Labour peer Doreen Lawrence, mother of the murdered teenager Stephen. And Evan, as I say, is a consultant to their legal team in the News Group litigation, which is, as he reminded us, separate from the Mirror Group litigation, although one or two names will pop up in both cases. 1 minute after 12 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. 4 minutes after 12 is the time. Karen has written, did you tell us the smelly adolescent boys thing? And the sad truth, Karen, is I didn't. The good news is that I didn't forget. I just decided that interspersing conversations about quite serious mental health problems with answers to the question of what scientists have discovered teenagers smell of would possibly challenge even my powers of eliding dark and light. But I will get to that a little later in the programme, 5 minutes after 12. I'm just going to read a couple of messages for a couple of the callers that we've had on already. I think one is for Carl and one is for Dave, actually. This one is a consequence of Dave. And there's something at the end of this that I really need to get to as well. James, I've just had to pull over. No, this one's for Carl and the next one is for Dave. I've just had to pull over in my van, allow myself some space to listen and let out how I feel with your caller, Carl. I spent a large part of my life working with children who have mental health conditions. It always felt like it was something that came naturally to me, and I never really knew why. Until one day I was talking with the resident psychologist about it, and they asked me a question. Does it feel like helping them to understand what they're going through is helping you to understand how you felt growing up? I did all the usual male machismo denial at first, but I could feel my heart racing and my breathing became hard. Then I just broke down. I'd spent so long putting on a brave face about how I felt that I'd hidden myself from it, and that mask became me. So even though I understood mental health, and even though I had supported hundreds of people and was always empathetic to others, I had always avoided my own issues because I was scared to show what I thought was weakness. I actually don't mind whether you read this out or not. I just haven't ever said this out loud before, and your caller made me feel that I had to. So thank you, Carl, for sharing. If nothing else, you have helped me. Helped a lot of people, actually, already, as has Dave, which is a much shorter message. It just says, please tell your caller, Dave, that he has just empowered me to seek help. His confidence and normality have shown me that it's okay not to feel okay. Please don't say my name. These are the people that Mel Stride thinks are swinging the lead or making it up or wasting doctors' times or spaffing your money. It's 7 after 12. Let's go to Lewisham. John's there. John, what would you like to say?
Hey, thanks so much for talking about this stuff. It's amazing to hear you. I'm also in a van, and I also had to pull over and call in to kind of join the chat.
This is van life.
It's van life, yeah, absolutely. But I think what really struck with me was when you were talking about going to boarding school, which I did as well, and being taught to be sort of stoic and competitive, and if you are struggling or you're stressed, nonsense, you'll be fine. That kind of mentality, that stiff upper lip sort of get over it. And the competitiveness of it all gets kind of on top of you. And I never really listened to that when I was a kid. I was always I had a belief that I was this extrovert who was very confident. I was in competitions for music. I was all that sort of stuff. And I ended up in a business with two lovely people, wonderful guys, that I ran a business with for nearly 2 decades. Utterly miserable, utterly stressed and anxious and not acknowledging it. And really the people that saw it, that got the thick end of it, was my ever-patient wife,
right,
who just kept saying to me, you've got to leave, you've got to quit, you can't do this. And me saying, nonsense, that's absolutely nonsense, I can't quit. And my business partners who would get a sick ear whilst I blamed them for all of this, saying there's a reason why things aren't right, and it clearly can't be my fault. It can't be me being in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Yeah.
And I think what happens to a lot of us is that kind of boiling frog sort of analogy, isn't it? When you don't kind of quite realise just how bad things are.
It's also worth reminding ourselves that for some people, the frog never actually gets quite boiled, because what you're describing in some circumstances, and possibly in your business environment, can actually be seen as positives. And if the environment is telling you that these are positives, being constantly stressed, being constantly on edge, being someone who will deal with these problems immediately, send that person away with a flea in their ear. The environment we're in is telling us these are strengths and positives. The society we inhabit praises people who seem to be devoid of empathy, like Boris Johnson and others, and so you can end up in a double denial. Like, you can't possibly be hurting me because people like me are winners.
Well, this is it. And then ultimately, what happened in my case was my body decided enough was enough, and my body just gave up. I was taking increasingly more and more days off from being tired.
It's the psychic toll, isn't it? Essentially,
Yeah, and it does wear you down one way or another. Your body gets the better of you. And I remember a turning point for me was I'd had a really bizarre dream where I was running the London Marathon, and in my dream I came last because I was helping homeless people, which, go with me on this, it might sound random, but go with me. So the next day I rang up my friend who runs the homeless charity and said to him, I've had this funny dream about you, mate. And he goes, well, buy yourself some running shoes. I've got a spare place in the marathon. You're going to be running it.
Yeah.
And what happened was that I couldn't run a single mile, so I thought he was bonkers. But what happened was, whilst we were running, turns out he's a therapist who's actually very, very clever. He started to diagnose me and started to we chatted and chatted. And as the runs got longer and longer and longer, he turned around to me one day and said, John, you've got depression. You are depressed. And I'm like, that's rubbish, shut up. No, not me. That's what other people have. That's what people have who have problems. They have these kind of things, not me. And it broke me. And I went to the doctor, and the doctor said, oh my gosh, you need to deal with this.
But I mean, this is making my blood boil, because this is Mel Stride saying some people were going to the doctors with just the normal ups and downs of life. And if you'd read that, you might have thought, oh yeah, he's right. This is just the normal ups. I haven't got depression at all.
This is it. And
oh man.
So I ended up, my business partners were very good about it. They said, you need to take some time off work, which ended up being about 6 weeks. I left the business with them in the best possible way. But it took about a year of just not being able to leave the house, not being able to leave my bed, being in a darkened room, crying to myself for being a failure. That feeling where you think, oh my gosh, I'm not strong enough.
Yeah, there's something wrong with me. It's my fault.
But another friend of mine, a guy called Patrick, said, the depression is not because you're not strong enough. It's because you've been strong for too long.
Oh, I like that.
Too strong for too long.
Oh, I like that.
And Patrick Regan, I'd like to take credit for this, but I can't. He'd be mad at me if I did. But and it's so true, because ultimately you're trying to keep it all together. You're trying to keep yourself going. One way or another, your body says enough is enough. And so a few realizations was, firstly, everything around this came about because I was a people pleaser, which I think is what gets drummed into us, especially at boarding school and all the kind of areas. You've got to be pleasing people. You've got to be seen to be successful. You've got to be kind of making sure that everyone likes you and you're doing the right thing, rather than not caring what other people think about you, which is very difficult to do. And the other thing was realizing that I was an introvert, not an extrovert. realising that actually what I needed most was to be on my own
and to be as they talk about the authentic self, and to be your authentic self, to be who you actually want to be instead of who you think the world wants you to be. And just think for a minute, if you know, not you, John, everybody else, if you're struggling still to grasp some of this. So think for a minute about a sausage machine, and it's turned you into a certain shape. You're not meant to be that shape. The strain and the exhaustion of maintaining that shape is eating away at you all of the time. But you've got no idea that you're not in the shape that you're supposed to be in, because you think, and especially, again, I come back to the way that society sometimes rewards the misshapes. It rewards the things that have boxed us into shapes we don't want to be. You end up carrying burdens that can become unbearable, and they became unbearable for John and for all of our callers. I'm cracking on, mate, only because I want to squeeze in one more person. Before that, just a quick mention, because it's important to know where else the problems lie. This is from Jason, who writes, people like Mel Stride and a few others I could mention always throw in the line, not people who are seriously ill, of course, or not those with genuine need. This is a mechanism to throw shade over the issue of mental health while pretending that you care. We are only talking about people with genuine and real mental health issues. That is the point. And I think you're right. And look out for that kind of lie. Look out for that kind of, oh, I don't mean you. Oh, no, obviously the genuine cases. How on earth could someone who does what I do for a living know what is a genuine case and what isn't? You trust the professionals, except Mel Stride's telling you not to go to the professionals. You see how it works yet? Donna is in Hester in Norway. Donna, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
First of all, can I just say I've been blown away by the guys on your show today.
Good.
Absolutely fantastic.
They've been amazing, haven't they? They've been immense.
Yeah. Totally humbled by them. Wonderful.
Thank you.
We've spoken before, so I have quite an alternative lifestyle here in Norway. I'm a mountaineer. I've run ultra marathons, all those kind of high adrenaline sports. Very strong mentally, very, very strong physically. I was.
Yes.
Until about 16 months ago.
Right.
I thought I was going through the menopause because I'm at that age. So I just, crack on, Donna, push through, until I got to the point where I started having seizures. I couldn't speak. I created this stammer. I was having these shakes. My walk had gone. I couldn't walk. I couldn't walk. So obviously went to see neurologists. So they said that I have something called FND, which is functional neurological disorder.
Right.
I'd never heard of it. Also fibromyalgia, but I'd never heard of FND. And I'm not a person that goes on the internet and starts that deep dive. But my neurologist said, go onto this website and have a look at here. It's trusted. And it just ticked every box for me. So it is partly physical, but a lot of it is mental health issues. And I'm still on this journey now. I can't do what I used to do. And I used to be one of these people. I would sit there, listen to your show or watch TV, people with mental health issues. And, just go outside, just go for a walk, push yourself.
Not in a contemptuous fashion, I sense, but in in what you thought was constructive.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. I was totally on that page until this happened to me, because I thought I am not that person. I'm not that person, but I am. And my biggest
we all are, potentially. That's the point that these people miss so completely.
Absolutely. My biggest advice to somebody that's going through this is accept who you are today. Love who you are today. Things can and will get better if you just let go. Just accept who you are. Because I was fighting it for such a long time, and actually it was making everything worse for me until I've had therapies, physical and cognitive. And
you don't have to fight. You don't have to fight it on your own.
No.
And sometimes you just have to sit with the pain. You sound like me. You try and talk yourself out of it. I know it's not that bad. No, I'll be fine. I'll be fine. I'll be fine. Come on. We can do this. Let's do it. But sometimes you just got to go, God, this is bloody awful.
Yeah, you sit on the toilet because it's the only place that you've got where you're on the road, and you cry because you think, so much pain physically, but mentally, because who am I? What's my purpose in life? But I think as soon as you start accepting who you are today, you can get back on, maybe not be who you was, but you can start a new version of who you are.
A more authentic
Yeah.
version of who you are and who you want to be. And I'll say again, the strain of carrying the burden of being who you think you're supposed to be, who your teachers have told you should be, who you've had to become in order to escape the pain that you felt at 10 or 12 or 15. This is me now. That can be huge. And some of us, I don't reach the point of buckling. But if you're really lucky, you can start doing the work and undoing some of what we've been describing before you reach a point of crisis. And that is no doubt the person that Mel Stride really hates. Person who wants a little bit of help with their mental health before they're in a state of absolute crisis or meltdown, or even in the sort of circumstances that our earlier callers have referred to, the grimmest possible state imaginable. That. Thank you, Donna. We're adding you to the list of incredibly powerful callers, and we are making the promise once again that we will not leave this territory alone for as long as people who need help are being maligned and stigmatized by people who should be providing their help. We will keep this conversation alive. However, I am allowing us, I think, a little bit of a TGI Friday moment next. I don't think, I really don't, and I've had a couple of texts. So, Billy Bunch of Numbers with the, I can't say bulldog anymore, can I? After that nice lady yesterday on. So what we're going to say, Billy Bunch of Numbers with the flag avatars. Billy Bunch of Numbers with the flag avatars. But I don't know whether they're real or not. So I had one text about 20 minutes ago saying, are you going to be talking about how St. George's flag is far right and not patriotic or something? But I honestly don't know whether you are someone who has gammon where most of us have brains, or whether you are taking the mickey out of people who have gammon where most of us have brains. Because there is a story around today. It's actually been around for a few days, but the Sun particularly keen to distract us from other things happening in the country at the moment. What might that involve or include, I wonder? That there's a sort of embroidered cross on the back of the shirts that England will be wearing on Saturday when they play Brazil. If you're going to the Kidderminster Wealdstone game, by the way, I think you can get a discount if you've already got a ticket for the Wembley game. They should put me on commission. I think you can get a discount for the Kidderminster Wealdstone game if you've already got your ticket for the England-Brazil game. But obviously, I don't want you to get your standards too high watching Kiddie Wealdstone, because it's going to be a big crashing back down to earth when you have to go and watch England play Brazil. Crikey, talk about a talent contrast. But there's a little flag on the back of the shirt, right? And it's multicoloured. It's nothing to do with pride or transgender issues or transgender people or Black Lives Matter. It's just some colours on a shirt. And apparently some people are furious. But I don't think anyone is remotely cross at all. At least by the time I've finished talking about it at about 12:26 today, no one's going to be able to tell me that they're angry, are they? 24 minutes after 12. Right, hold on to your hats. There was widespread fury last night over England's controversial new shirt, which features an altered version of the St. George's cross on the collar. The FA and manufacturers Nike doubled down yesterday, insisting they have no plans to recall the jersey. Nike described the navy, light blue and purple design as a playful update on the nation's flag. They say the changed kit is not virtue signalling, but instead a nod to the 1966 World Cup winners. In other news, I mentioned to you the story about this Parliament presiding over the worst decline in living standards since 1961. You dig a little further into some of this research and you'll discover that there has been a 68% increase in the number of people who don't have enough food in this country at this time in 1 year. In the last year, there has been a 68% increase in the number of people who don't have enough food. The total now stands at 3.7 million people. But there was widespread fury last night over England's controversial new shirt, which features an altered... And I know the politicians are all queuing up to pretend that they're cross about it as well, because do you know why? because they're still frightened of these newspapers. So that's the Mail that I'm reading from. Let's see what the Sun's got to say. The FA and Nike were blasted last night for changing the traditional St George's flag on England's football tops. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer called for a rethink and hit out at their prices. That's reasonable, hitting out the prices. But what I love about these stories, and there was another one earlier this week about a fish and chip shop where the owner has painted a mural on the wall outside his shop, which he's not allowed to do, any more than you are allowed to paint a mural on the front of your house saying something like, buy, I don't know, crypto. There are rules. Councils impose rules on this sort of thing, and particularly if you're in a World Heritage Centre, you're not allowed to paint murals generally, and you're certainly not allowed to put up your own advertising. But he included a flag, which meant that a certain corner of the British media pretended that something outrageous had happened. And it's largely harmless fun until the far right get involved. I remember researching a story about flags in a council block, and the claim had got halfway around the world before the truth had got its trousers on, that the council was deliberately taking down union flags because they offended Muslims. And you looked into the story, and the council had just said, all flags have got to come down. I think it might have been during a World Cup. There wasn't a Muslim anywhere near the story. It was absolutely extraordinary. The best story ever in this field, in my opinion, is the story of Winterval. Now, I'm not going to go into it now because I'm running out of time, and I've got another guest who I really want you to hear from. But look it up, all right? Or rather, look it up in my book. You don't have to buy it. Get it from the library. How to be right in a world gone wrong. The story of Winterval. In other words, how you manipulate people into getting cross about very silly things. How do you manipulate people into getting cross about very silly things? And the story of Winterval in Birmingham about 30 years ago is the absolute mothership. Naively, if you're in the business of pointing out how stupid these stories are, you might think that every time you pointed one out, whether it's a fish and chip shop in Greenwich or Winterval in Birmingham, the next time it comes along, people will be a little bit less susceptible to the incredibly dishonest and cynical what's the word I'm looking for? Provocation or whatever it is. Manipulation. Do you remember when everything was blue at the London Olympics? Am I the only one that remembers this? The uniforms were blue. They dressed up in blue. Sir Chris Hoy had a blue kit, but it wasn't just blue. It was the Union flag graphics, like the Union flag stripes, but in blue. I've just been sent a picture by Dean of a mug, a blue mug. It's a Union flag and someone's made it blue. There was fury last night after Olympians were caught drinking tea out of Union flag mugs that were an inexplicable shade of blue. So anyway, the what it is on the back, it's got on a blue background and it is red and blue and a bit purple. And it's a nice cross and it's a nice shape. And the world has stopped to describe what they are furious about. I don't remember similar levels of fury last time it happened, when it was a blue Union flag. But today we have two challenges. The first question is, are you really and truly furious about this? Because the Daily Mail says you are. Or at least that there's widespread fury. That's the first question. I've got three questions, all right? No one's actually furious, are they? I mean, genuinely furious. If so, tell me why. 0345 606 0973. To be clear, if I was a politician, I'd say that this was wrong. Because the alternative would to be on the front page of The Sun tomorrow being accused of hating your country. You think I'm exaggerating? Paul Dacre accused Ed Miliband's dead father, who fought at D-Day, I think, of hating Britain. So that's how these people operate. If you were a politician and you didn't say, oh, this is awful, then you'd be accused of hating. Why does he hate Britain? So if I was a politician, I wouldn't think it was important enough to make a stand on. As it is, I really couldn't care less. I cannot begin to understand. And here's another thing I'll tell you. Come here. I don't want to speak out of turn, but no one in this line of work gives a monkeys about this. Seriously. They just think you're so stupid they can get you riled up about it. Not literally no. You think that somebody doing this, someone writing a column, actually cares about a cross being a bit purple What's the problem here, lads? It's a bit purple, James. What? It's what? It's a bit purple. So, I'm going to do myself out of a phone in a minute. I really do want you to call me if you are genuinely furious. All right? 0345 6060973. The cross on the back. So what you can't do is ring me that say, I'm not furious, James. Just a little cross. It is just a little cross on the back of the England shirt, and it's a bit purple. Genuine fury. It's genuine fury. All right? 0345 6060973. And then the second question, which I have a horrible feeling may be a little bit easier for you to answer, is what are we supposed to be cross about? 0345 6060973. There you go. Here we go. I've got one. I think it's real. Hang on. I've got one. I've got a live one. Why do you dislike the people who value our heritage and love our country? A real shame, and shame on you. You like to talk Gaza, but you won't call out Sadiq Khan for the number of employees on the London Council being paid six figures. Yet less and less social housing is being created and more low-traffic neighbourhoods. You love it. This is a conversation about a flag on the back of the England football shirt that's a bit purple, and Fred is bringing housing shortages and low-traffic neighbourhoods into it. He goes on, and yes, I am mad. It's our flag, and he uses capital letters. It's our flag of our country. How dare a global company adjust it? You wouldn't like a Gaza flag painted up differently. All right, hand on heart. Is he for real, or is he taking the mickey out of Billy Bunch of Numbers with the flag emojis and gammon between his ears? I don't know. I don't even... Can I see any things he sent into the programme before? Can we establish whether Fred is a real person or whether he is taking the mickey out of people that we consider to be real? So the question is, are you really furious? Fred is, apparently. Give me a ring, Fred. Talk me through it. And love to the family. And if not, then what are we supposed to be furious about? It's a bit purple. Can you stop saying Amelia Cox in my ear? Nobody is furious about Amelia Cox. I keep saying, what are you furious about? And you keep saying Amelia Cox. It is, however, 33 minutes after 12 and time for the very latest news headlines with Amelia Cox. Nobody's furious except Billy Bunch of Numbers. And Peter Shilton, apparently. He was on the radio earlier this morning saying that it's outrageous. So I'm going to read you two texts. One is from Stork, which says, you are really wrong on this one, James. You really should care. It's our identity that's being slowly erased. And I'm going to ask you what on earth is he talking about? How is our identity being slowly erased? Because a cross on the back of the New England shirt is a bit purple. Producer is sending me messages saying nobody's cross. Well, you're not reading the inbox. Look at the state of Fred. I'm going to read Fred's again, and then we may have to change the question slightly and say, what is Fred really cross about? 0345 6060973. Fred's written, why do you dislike the people who value our heritage and love our country? We've spent the last hour, Fred, protecting people from their own government. Yesterday, there were a number of military veterans involved in this, focusing upon the mental health difficulties that people who served our country have, and how the current government not only bears some responsibility for them, but is attempting to stigmatise them for suffering from them. And you're upset about some purple cotton on the back of a shirt. You look me in the eye and tell me who is doing more to protect the values of this country, angry purple cotton man, or angry with the architects of austerity and the introducers of unparalleled poverty man. But I'll take you seriously. Also, when thinking about some purple on the back of a shirt, inevitably you find yourself turning your attention to the Gaza Strip and the fact that I won't call out Sadiq for paying over 1,000 employees of the London Council six figures. Mate, James cleverly spent that on a single flight to Rwanda and back to sign a treaty that only became necessary to sign because they couldn't get the original one through their own Supreme Court. So what are you really cross about? Less and less social housing is being created. Well, have a look at how much donations property companies make to the Tory party. And low traffic networks. They have been found to be popular in the areas where they've been introduced. Not my opinion. The Department of Transport. A report commissioned in the hope of proving people like you right, but, and you must be used to it by now, it ended up proving you wrong. And now we come to the capitals. The flag in capitals should not be touched. And yes, I am mad. It's our, and capitals again, flag of our country. How dare a global company adjust? You wouldn't like a Gaza flag painted up differently. I'm not sure I could tell you that it had been. In fact, I'm pretty sure I couldn't tell you. I'm very bad at flags. I'm awful when they come up on University Challenge. I wouldn't be able to tell you what is a Gaza flag. Anyway, do you mean the Palestinian flag? I couldn't paint that for you now. I can tell you that the whole Union flag was turned blue for the Olympics in 2012. Did that demand capital letters? So it's Fred real. And if he is real, what's he really cross about? 0345 606 0973. So I'll tell you what you should be cross about. Bloody Brexit. That's actual real life impacts upon real people in the real world. And the latest one involves the trade agenda essentially turning its attention to the Gulf states. Graham Langtry is a tireless chronicler of Brexit reality, plying his trade for Politico Europe as their UK trade reporter. Couple of things to touch on today. We'll begin with, I almost had to do a double take on this one. Are the Gulf states Rishi Sunak's last hope? We know that India has ground to a bit of a halt, and we know that the Canadian government, because you told us, have denied Kemi Badenoch's claim that their negotiations are still going great guns. If they are, she's in the bathroom talking into a mirror because there ain't no Canadians sitting around that table. So why are we turning attention to the Gulf states, Graham?
Well, thanks for having me on, James. The Gulf states, the UK is currently working on this negotiation with 6 of them. They're part of a group called the Gulf Cooperation Council, and it's nations like Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Oman, Qatar, and UK negotiators. They flew out to Riyadh to have intersessional talks at the beginning of this week. They finished their 6th round last month, and it looks like they're going into their 7th round. But as you say, the talks with Canada have kind of ground to a halt. India's negotiations with the UK were put on hold last Friday because they're having elections, and those probably won't begin again until June. So if the UK wants to get any kind of trade win this year, it seems like the Gulf states are the ones that are going to kind of carry the day.
And what will we get out of it? What are the noises you're hearing about the boundless benefits that British customers will receive?
Well, I mean, the UK's own modeling going into these negotiations showed that if they got everything that they wanted, it would give a bit of a uplift to GDP of about 0.06%. Okay. And that would rise to about 0.11% over 15 years. But what we're hearing at the moment is that as things stand, these negotiations, if they do end up into a final deal, it'll probably be on WTO terms plus, which basically means WTO rules with a little bit more market access. And what we're hearing is that at the moment, it's not exactly exciting for Britain's services sector, which is kind of like the powerhouse of the economy at the moment. That's what really, gets the economy going is services, things like financial services, business services. But this deal probably won't offer very much in terms of that, basically because all of these nations, all the Gulf nations, they all have different kind of regulatory regimes, and they don't agree on a lot of different things together. So it's very difficult to get them to agree on that to open up access.
Are you telling me that the 6-nation bloc is not a single market, Graham? Is that what I'm hearing here?
Well, it's not a single market, no.
Or even a customs union?
It's not a customs union.
Okay. And with a general election on the horizon and the lesson of Liz Truss apparently not having been learned, would it be cynical of me to wonder whether they're pursuing this in the hope of being able to announce a trade deal before a general election that most people who are desperate for trade deals won't go to the trouble of actually looking into?
I mean, it's a good question. I'm not really sure. I don't know. I don't have any insight into whether or not the deal will actually be struck. They've focused their attention on this now because some of these other things have kind of fallen away. So if the Department of for Business and Trade is going to focus on anything, this would probably be it. There's other negotiations that have started, like ones with Turkey recently,
yes, I saw that.
And South Korea, but they're not very far along. And this is one of the ones that's furthest along. So they're kind of putting their attention towards that. But I mean, politically, there's a lot of opposition to, I mean, if you talk to people like the TUC, the unions, they have concerns about workers' rights in these countries and whether or not a deal with these nations would potentially undercut British workers because, their workers work to a lower standard and it allows the goods to be cheaper. So, I think that's a kind of open question.
I forget, well, it's probably all of them, the Brexiters that told us that other countries would be queuing up to sign trade deals with Brexit Britain. Speaking of which, quite confusing news out of Portsmouth, but not, I don't imagine, confusing for you.
Oh, right, about the border control post, that it might be destroyed.
Just hang on, you just gloss over that in your characteristically lugubrious fashion. We're talking about a massive multi-million-pound goods processing depot in Portsmouth, paid for by central government and local council, that they're now possibly going to demolish completely. What's happened?
Yeah, I mean, over the years leading up to Brexit and the potentially introducing border controls in early 2021, the British government spent quite a bit of public money, and there was a lot of private money that went into creating border control posts. All told, it was about £500 million of public and private money that went into these control posts. And without the checks being introduced, although they are, supposedly coming in physical checks at the end of April, a lot of these border control posts haven't been used yet. So they've been kind of sitting empty. The one in Portsmouth, I toured it in July 2022, and it was empty at that time. And the local council there, the Portsmouth City Council, had paid about £8 million into this facility, and they were quite concerned that it wasn't being used yet. So it's kind of sad to hear that,
because the volumes that used to come here and didn't need checking are no longer coming here, partly because they would need checking.
Right, yeah.
Because they were expecting 500 lorry loads a day, and they're going to be getting in single figures. So how has that bit happened?
So they're considering a smaller post to handle that.
But why are they not getting the numbers they thought they were going to get when they built these places?
Well, I mean, it could be down to the fact that some EU exporters don't want to export to the UK. I mean, I'm not really quite sure.
No. Graham, always a pleasure. Thank you very much. I don't suppose you've got strong views on the purple cotton on the back of the England football shirt, have you? As a Canadian, you better stay well away from this, mate. You could probably get deported if you said the wrong thing. Graham Langtry from Politico, the UK trade expert, and God knows we need them at the moment. 12:47 is the time. Up next, fury. Abject fury. Rage. Wait a second. I'm just going to check before we go to the break. Chris is in Nottingham. Chris, I'm about to go to the break. Are you furious?
I'm not, James, but I think you should be.
What? Okay, well, we'll find out. And Claire's in York. Claire, are you furious?
Oh, I'm mildly disappointed.
You don't sound furious. Get me. I wanted fury. Get me some fury now. It is 12:52. Listen, we better try and find some furious people, and then I've got a lovely clip of this week's Full Disclosure to play, which actually, by complete coincidence, will take you back to one of the finest moments in the history of international sport. Britain, rather than England's role in international sport. Truly, what would you think of first? One of the absolute most magical moments. But before that, Chris in Nottingham is not furious.
I'm not, James.
Why aren't
you furious? Well, probably because my favourite T-shirt used to be one with the Union flag on in 50 Shades of Grey.
I'm looking at Boris Johnson, which no one should have to do, really, without being paid, and thankfully I am, and his leadership election campaign from 2019 when the Union flag was turned blue. The whole Union flag, not only was it blue, they cropped it into the shape of an oak tree.
Yeah, I think... for me, this is not about the flag.
It's not really good enough. It says widespread fury last night.
Well, not here in Nottingham, not where I'm sat.
Right,
what I am annoyed about, though, is that it represents to me the thing that really winds me up is arrogance, and this is reflected in way our politicians behave and get away with it, and then the big corporation can just change the flag and get away with it.
Probably on the wrong show. If you've got a problem with arrogance, you may have accidentally rung the wrong presenter. But it's not, mate. The FA sign off on this. They want the kit designers to come up with twists and changes and playful new.
Lovely.
So how is it arrogant? How is it arrogant?
Well, I think because the Union flag should be left alone.
It's not the Union flag.
And the cross of St George should be left alone. That should be left there.
But we turned it blue for the Olympics.
Yeah.
I bet you didn't even notice. Be honest with me.
I didn't. No, you're absolutely right.
So you're not even mildly annoyed about this. You just read the story, felt some anger and thought, James has made me feel a little bit silly. I better come up with something that sounds vaguely plausible.
No, not even angry at all. I just, as I say, I think
why have you wronged me?
Because I think this is another instance of people just doing whatever the hell they like and getting away with it, and we should be getting annoyed about that.
Okay.
It's not about the flag at all.
But you're not annoyed. We should be getting annoyed about it, but you're not annoyed.
I can get monkeys. I don't like football anyway.
Right. So. Claire's in. These are the people that the Daily Mail and the Sun is riling up today. Claire's in York. Claire, what are you mildly cross about?
Please don't put me in with the Daily Mail. I'm a dyed-in-the-wool lefty. I'm not a right-wing gammon or anything, but I just think I think Emily Thornberry said it right. I think it's weird. But now you've said about the Olympics, I was unwell when the Olympics was on.
I'm sorry to hear that.
And I wasn't aware of what was happening then, so I didn't know about the flag. I just think it's weird when a country's in a competition are represented by their flag.
Well, they're not really. They're represented by the players.
No, but to denote
they haven't dyed Harry Kane purple.
No, but they denote. They're denoted by their flag.
Not in the case of football. It'd be the three lions on the front of the shirt that are the team badges.
But it's England playing another, whatever other country.
Are you worrying about people who might forget who they're watching?
Well, for me, who doesn't know who's who in football,
Okay, so you and Chris, I knew this wasn't a phone-in. I've lost my skills at finding the truly furious people. You're mildly annoyed about something you don't understand involving a sport you don't follow.
Yes.
Well, down with that sort of thing, Claire.
No, but can I just say?
No. Oh, go on then. But if I say no, will you go away furious at least? That arrogant so-and-so on the radio, I rang him in, he was rude to me, he talked all over me, and then he wouldn't let me have my say. I'm furious. So if I can't get people who are furious to ring in, maybe I can get people who are furious to ring off.
Well, all I wanted to say was about patriotism. Sometimes I get annoyed that people on the left seem to scoff at patriotism. And
you're talking about people, though. People on the left think we should care about people, not about flags.
Yes,
so patriotism is about caring for your countrymen and women. Yeah. It's about caring for people who are poor. It's about caring for people who are victimised and vulnerable and not being looked after. And that's what people on the left try to do, Claire. People on the right try to pretend we should care about flags and slogans and ludicrous, meaningless notions like sovereignty. I think, with respect, you might have got things the wrong way round.
No, I absolutely care about all those things. So all I was saying, that I was going to say, your callers prove I'm patriotic, not because of the government, but because of those people, the kinds of people that call into your show.
Well, they're most... Anyway, I've got to crack on. I'm sorry you weren't furious. I hope you are now. Torvill and Dean, guys. Torvill and Dean, first and probably only ever episode of Full Disclosure where it was 2 against 1.
You know, when I listen to stories of other Olympians or athletes, when they're the one person on their own, I think we were lucky to have each other, because either of us could have been single skaters. And that's a different thing, because, you know, you go into the rink one day and think, I'm not going to practice my triple salchow today because I don't really feel like it. But when you've got a partner, you can't say, I'm not doing that run through today because I don't feel it. You do it for each other.
Yes. There's 2 sides to it, isn't there? There's you need to do it for each other, but you also have to be the person that the other person can rely on. So it's completely symbiotic.
Yeah.
It's a complete...
Yeah. I think that's what's forged our longevity as well, that we've gone through so much.
No one else knows what it's like to be either one of you except each other.
That's right, yeah.
But it's also nice that when someone wins the Olympics and they're on their own, you know, they say, how does it feel? And quite often you can't describe how it feels, but we know how it felt because there were 2 of us, kind of thing. So that's nice. And
the Olympic gold, that was the thing that mattered most, I think.
That's what we were aiming for.
Always.
You know, that was sort of the...
Why? It's just because that's the pinnacle of
we'd won the World Championships, we'd won the European Championships, and we just hadn't won the Olympics. So
you needed it.
Yeah, and you know, it is the biggest sporting event for athletes to be there and ready on that one day for that 4 minutes every 4 years. Yeah.
I watched it last night.
Did you?
Yeah. It's bonkers. It's so beautiful. It's
Thank you.
But even now, you know, and it's part of our cultural furniture as a country, isn't it? That's gorgeous, that interview. Seriously, even the bits I'm in. You can download it from Global Player. Jen has reminded me, I completely forgot to tell you what teenagers smell of. Are you doing this topic?
No, smelly teenagers?
Yeah.
No.
I've got 5 things they smell of and I've forgotten.
Actual things, or just are we describing the whiff?
Goats.
Oh, no, we're just describing the whiff.
Cheese. No, this is science. Goats, cheese, wax, urine, and what? There's one other thing.
Bad perfume?
No, it's real science, Sheila. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, the official LBC app, where you can also pause and rewind live radio. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Tom Swarbrick back in the chair at 4 o'clock today, but now it's time for Sheila Fogarty.
The very fragrant Sheila Fogarty.
The very fragrant Sheila Fogarty, who does not smell of goat or urine.
Not typically, anyway. Do you know what I can't give a stuff about? Do you know what I think?
Flags?
Flags. But to such a degree that I'm going to talk about them at 3 o'clock.
So I've tried that. It's doomed to fail.
Is it okay? Well, we'll give it another go. Is it okay? Well, we'll give it another go. Is it okay? Well, we'll give it another go. Is it okay? Well, we'll give it another go. Is it okay? Well, we'll give it another go. Is it okay? Well, we'll give it another go. Is it okay? Well, we'll give it another go. Is it okay? Well, we'll give it another go. Is it okay? Well, we'll give it another go. Is it okay? Well, we'll give it another go. Is it okay? Well, we'll give it another go. Is it okay? Well, we'll give it another go. Is it okay? Well, we'll give it another go. Is it okay? Well, we'll give